and welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. And before we bring on our amazing guest for a part two conversation, I just wanted to run through a couple of quick announcements. We do have our Innovator Summit coming up at the end of this month. If you are interested in registering, we get a really great discount code, and all of that information will be in the chat. We are also looking for sponsors. So if you're interested in sponsoring a HITLAB event, including Women's Health Tech Wednesdays, use the QR code to get more information or head to the chat for a link on that as well. And so with that, I want to bring on our amazing guest, April Smith-Hirak, who is the Regional Health Administrator for the Department of Health and Human Services. As you know, we love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any for April, please add them at the chat or the Q&A feature, and I will make sure that we get to it. So with that, wanted to formally welcome April. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Nina. It's always fun to do these.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe to kind of kick things off, would love if you could just provide us with, a quick introduction and maybe walk us through your career journey that has kind of led you to where you are at HHS.
Sure. So my name is April Smith-Hirak, and I am the Regional Health Administrator out of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health. So I work for the Assistant Secretary for Health. Most of what we do is largely policy. We do policy delivery and formulation implementation. My job is to make sure that the work that we're doing in the federal government is really resonating and applicable and appropriate for the jurisdictions that we represent in our region. And I also carry the focus for our Regional Health Operations Office on all of the emerging digital health technology. So I do a lot of work across the department with all of that. And I did not get here normally. So my career journey has been a little bit of a non-traditional one. I'm not a traditional public health practitioner. I'm a trained research psychologist, and I started out in cognitive psychology. And then quickly realized that cognitive psychology focused a lot on this black box of like what happens as we think about things. And I wasn't as interested in it as I thought I was. And what I was really very interested in was, social and health psychology. And so I quickly moved over, researched in a clinical lab, but focused on social psychology within the clinical setting. And that was how I started working. And I always thought that I was going to be possibly a clinician and definitely a researcher, and the expectation was that I would be a professor today. So that's actually not at all what happened in my career.
We love that. We love like the untraditional paths and really being able to quickly learn kind of what speaks to you and what doesn't speak to you.
Yeah, it was a lot of making decisions and realizing that they weren't the right thing for me, and then eventually coming to a place where I'm not sure how I arrived here, but I really enjoy what I do. So there was a moment where I thought I was going to go to law school. I was really interested in being a trial selection consultant. And so I wanted to go to law school and be an attorney for that. And I was really focused on anti-discrimination law, and realized after working as a paralegal in the interim that it was actually not for me. So that was, at that time, $120,000. So I said it was the best 120 grand I never spent to go to law school. And from there, I ended up going into the government, but I went in as a behavioral scientist thinking I was going to research. And I fell in love with policy and communications while I was working for the government. I was fortunate to be in a rotational program, and I had a lot of jobs, a lot of different positions. I started out at CDC, and I made my rounds at CDC. And my last position at CDC, I did infectious disease issues management, which was nothing I had ever been trained in. So I learned a lot about infectious disease in that position, and then eventually moved to a regional office. And the position has evolved a lot over time. It went from a programmatic focus to really a policy focus. And bringing it back to this policy focus has really been exactly what I love to do. So I'm very fortunate.
That's amazing. That's quite a journey. I absolutely love that you've kind of found your place that really leverages kind of the things that you were looking for. I think that's amazing. And maybe on that note, would love if you can expand a little bit on kind of the work that you do at HHS. I know you mentioned some of the work that you play is very jurisdiction or maybe more local, but you also have this broader role as well. So would love if you could share more about that.
Right. A lot of the roles of regional health administrator is to be a little bit of that ground truthing. We talk a little bit about the laugh test. Does something pass a laugh test, right? So sometimes we make these assumptions from inside the federal beltway that something really makes sense. And sometimes you need a reality check from outside the beltway to see, does that actually make sense? Is this something that is implementable? And what happens? What are the unintended consequences of existing policies? We do a lot of analysis. We do a lot of discussions about, where are there policy levers that we can shift, either us or the states or local government? What is it that we might be able to shift that would positively impact health, right? Enable everybody to be healthy or reach their health goals. And sometimes those are very surprising things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So it requires a lot of divergent thinking, openness to communication and conversations. We convene a lot of conversations, and sometimes we get people together that you wouldn't really think that would be the result of the group that we had together. But the outcomes of some of these meetings, when you let them free flow and you really start listening to stakeholders, is I think much better informed and more realistic policy. And really being able to do that in New York, especially with the emerging health technology. Although I represent a lot of the emerging health technology issues across the country, because not every regional office can cover everything. So this is something that I've taken on in collaboration with my San Francisco partner, my counterpart over there. But being able to look at the landscape of emerging health technology and digital health and understand where the field is going 5, 10, 20 years from now. What are we focusing on that the issues will be different in 5 years? Like where are we misallocating our resources because we're working on problems that are already going to be solved by technology? Or what additional issues is technology going to create? Or what flexibilities have we put in place that have enabled us to be healthier? And what have we not done? So a lot of that thinking is the cool stuff that I get to do. And a big part of that is really getting to be part of the emerging health technology community, talking to digital health funders and founders and organizations like HITLAB that are supporting that ecosystem. It's really, really cool.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to pick your brain a little bit about like what you're seeing in the emerging tech space, because I think that's so incredible. But I really like that it seems like you're kind of able to focus and kind of think about the now, but also kind of have the eye towards the future. So it does seem like a very ever evolving and interesting, probably never bored. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I see conversation in the chat about AI, and
definitely
AI is interesting. It's really interesting, and there's a lot of discussion both federally and outside of the government in industry about what does AI mean for us. And it started really ramping up with the advent of ChatGPT a few months ago, I noticed. And, I was a little bit interested in that beforehand and concerned about some things beforehand. There are concerns. There's always concerns about bias and equity. Anytime you're programming AI, if you're using data that is biased, and so I'm a little bit of a data wonk, trained researcher, I'll own it. By understanding that the data that you collect is only as good as the biased environment in which it was collected. Right. So the understanding that a lot of the data that we have is reflective of a biased healthcare system that we already are existing in. And then iterating AI on that and training AI, if you can't find a way to mitigate for that bias in the AI data sets that it pulls from, your algorithms can end up incredibly skewed and biased. And so that has been a concern of mine for a long time. I think a lot of people realize and recognize this. And I hear a lot of discussion about how do we mitigate bias and how do we identify bias and how do we train better algorithms? And so I think it's great that the discussion is there. I think there's risk there, and there's also incredible potential gain. Because imagine if we could correct for bias in the AI, and we could come up with a much more equitable health system that is based on these AI platforms. So the potential is exponential in both directions. So that's my answer about the AI.
I love that. Actually, super curious when it comes to AI specifically. Because I think that's a huge concern really around kind of the decision support side or kind of the treatment side. Are you seeing any traction kind of when you think about the role of AI maybe in more of like the administrative functions of healthcare, or kind of to help supplement when you think about, like notes or scribing or messaging or anything like that? Are you seeing some movement, or is it still very kind of wait and see as an industry?
Well, I was at Vive in March, and it was still pretty early days for ChatGPT. And I want to acknowledge that ChatGPT is just a very, very small cross-section of the entirety of the GPT-4 technology. And a lot of the companies that I was working with or talking to were talking about how they were thinking about use cases and how they could integrate GPT-4 technology into their platforms. And a couple of weeks after that, Epic, which is like the largest manufacturer, seller of electronic medical records in the country, announced that they were integrating GPT-4 technology into their platform. So Epic is now integrating that into their platform. And any technology is only as good as the users intend and use it and design it. So I think that it remains to be seen. Definitely, were there AI-driven like chatbots, decision support algorithms for EMRs, for transcribing notes, for pulling things out of EMR PDF files? 100% yes. But I think the field is still incredibly nascent, so it'll be interesting to see where it does go and what it is eventually used for. And I think that the really interesting and cool thing about the power of AI is how much data, how much of a factor analysis it can actually do, and so quickly. So when I was in school doing a factor analysis, it was like based on the creativity and the understanding of your brain. And if you were able to identify like 5 factors in a factor analysis on a huge data set, then you were a god or goddess. It was a really hard thing to do, and you would have to be able to justify how and why each of those things, because as people, we're still looking at it with a lens.
Right.
And the ways that AI can integrate and analyze data and create reports on things like a massive factor analysis that I would never have been able to do on my own in graduate school, no matter what statistical programming I did. And that can be done in a matter of minutes. So the power of that and the potential for that to impact healthcare and every other facet of our life is actually really great, which is also why everybody is so scared of it, right? Because any flip side could also be equally bad, but the potential uses are really, really potentially beneficial, and the power of AI to rapidly analyze incredibly complex data problems is really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you framed it very, very well. You see the opportunity, you see the power, and you see the good of the power, but you could also see how that can, lend itself to some very unfortunate consequences. So it really is interesting. I think AI has been kind of the top of mind, I think, for a lot of people, especially in the past few months. So I think it is really interesting when we think about not just the technology, but I think the culture shift that is going to happen as a result of that technology. We could just go on and on about AI. Wanted to also kind of learn from you too, since I think you are in such a unique position where you're really able to kind of see what's happening in the pipeline, but also kind of what's happening kind of in the now. Are there any particular areas, I think, of, within the women's health, the femtech space, that you're seeing a lot of optimization, improvements, anything there that you're seeing that you're excited about?
Yeah, I think in the femtech and women's health tech space, it's really interesting to me because women as a population have been silently marginalized for eons in medical and health history. So if we're really looking at the standards of care, the cultural norms, and also just the medical norms that have been set, even reference ranges for a long time, clinical reference ranges for blood tests and other types of labs, they would be 100% based on men. And the thinking was that women and our pesky hormones and our cyclical changes that affect the ways in which our biochemical signature is working were too complex. And so they just wanted something straightforward, right? So then they would only research on men. And that over time has evolved. We have seen more representation of women. We've seen separate reference ranges. We've seen a little bit more understanding of hormones. But I think that the ways in which femtech and women's health tech are being employed has an opportunity to really equalize and provide appropriate care, appropriate standards of care, and provide women with better opportunities for health. And so I am really, really seeing that. And, later on this month, I'm going to be speaking on a panel about the importance of women participating in clinical trials, right? Mm-hmm. And so the more we can encourage the participation of the 51% of the population in the world in the medical and health system, and the more opportunities women have to be educated, to be founders, to be funders, to be part of a decision process, to be designing products and health solutions that really work for us as women and in an inclusive way that don't just work for the majority of women, but really address needs of special populations and different needs across the lifespan. I see that the field is it's still not saturated because the gap was so wide. And I see a lot of opportunity in emerging health technology for women's health issues. And I see that founders and funders are also being able to interact in that space. And I think that we are seeing it pick up because women's health is no longer seen as like this narrow niche market. I think that we're really seeing that solutions for women are solutions for half of a global marketplace. And that's really important to design for.
100%. Very that was a mic drop moment. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think, you really articulated the need and kind of the importance to focus on women's health, not just from a solutioning perspective, but really even upfront in the research. When in your experience, since I know you've also kind of played in that role as well, has it really just been, you're just not allowed to kind of, you're just not selected as a female to participate? Are there any other kind of barriers that, now as we are continuing and really pushing for women to play a role and be involved in clinical trials, that we really want to make sure that we're making it as easy as possible for them?
Well, I think that the norms and standards have changed. Frankly, I'm part of a generation that was raised to believe that we could have it all and we should have everything. Mm-hmm. All at once. And I don't know that necessarily served us. This is not the opinion of the federal government. This is just my personal experience. I don't know that it served us. And I think that younger women who are coming up the ranks are really seeing exactly that issue and looking at it and thinking about it in really different ways. And what is it important for us to have equal opportunity for? And are there times when you have some things and not others? And is that okay? And I think it's great that women now are in a position where they can question, not can you have everything? And the answer should be absolutely yes. Women can have everything that men can have, right? Yeah. It shouldn't be an equity issue. If you're a member of society, you should be able to participate regardless of your gender, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless of your race. All of those things should not factor. Sometimes they still do, but they shouldn't. And I think that it's accepted that they don't factor. They should not factor, even though occasionally they still do. Mm-hmm. I think that what's awesome about that is that with that as a baseline, which was something that my generation fought really hard to have, that baseline is that now women who are engaging and coming of age in this atmosphere get to decide and get to have that discourse of what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, what should the boundaries be, what are the limits, where is it different to be a woman in the workplace, where is it the same to be a woman in the workplace? And I think that those conversations are so much richer than the conversations that we could have when we were fighting just for inclusion. Mm-hmm. And the generation that came before me fought even harder just to be able to be admitted, not inclusion.
Right.
So I think getting to a point where we're able to have that conversation about nuance is a really interesting place to be. And I think this next generation of women is just going to knock it out of the park.
That's amazing. And I wholeheartedly agree. And I can definitely see how now we're in a place where it's almost a privilege to be able to talk about the nuance and the boundaries and kind of really what that means. And right. I definitely wholeheartedly resonate with what you're saying.
So to answer your question, because I didn't fully answer your question, I think that the ways in which we design products for women, it's really important to have women at the table and women founders and people who are of female experience to be designing these products and determining for themselves where that level of appropriateness is.
Right.
You know, that we need to pass that participation hurdle, but then we also need to identify what are the things that women need in order to be able to participate. And, you know, I think that we are really looking at that. And we're also looking at the ways in which the societal design of various factors impacts women's health. And so like we've issued some women's health challenges out of our women's health office. We've recently issued grants for innovation in endocrine disrupting chemicals and some other really cool opportunities. So I think that we're getting there. It's just that there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, but I mean, if anything, it's a really exciting kind of opportunity space for just continued conversation. I think that's a huge first step. And I think on that note, would love if you could share a little bit more about the Women's Health Challenge and some of the other kind of initiatives that you and your team have put forth. Yeah,
so and by my team, I have to say, like, I consider my team to be all of HHS, but I don't own all of these programs. So I'll just have that disclaimer. We're a pretty broad organization. And so like NIH falls under HHS. I work very closely with them. I don't supervise their work at all. So I'll just disclaimer that. But NIH is having an innovation equity forum this summer. They're talking about mapping global opportunities in women's research and development, which is really cool.
That's awesome.
And they have really, really broad participation from the women's health tech community, which I'm really excited to see. We're just seeing so much more in our SBIR, which it's Small Business Innovation Research Grants. There's a large profile out of NCI, overall NIH, NIH Women's Health. We see it in almost all of the NIH institutes. It's mandatory funding that we set aside, but what I'm most proud of is that the federal government has chosen to focus on innovation, really. Like, really looking at emerging technologies and the ways that that can impact health. We have a new agency called ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Projects Administration for Health. So ARPA-H is amazing, and they have program managers who are tackling really hard, impossible problems on 3- and 5-year cycles where they're getting grant money, and they're the people with the crazy ideas, like, what if we could do this? And we actually now have money to do that and try it and see if we can move the needle on some really challenging and awesome health issues. My office and the Office of the National Coordinator, we're working on a public-private partnership called Cancer X, which is part of the Cancer Moonshot that's run out of the White House, really looking at innovations. And looking at innovations, not just in traditional health things, like talking about financial insecurity in cancer treatment.
Absolutely.
Really different and innovative approaches to battling the reality of cancer, which will unfortunately touch almost all of us in some way or another. So that Cancer X is just launched, and it's really exciting.
Amazing.
I would encourage everybody to check that out. So we have like so many things ongoing. On the regulatory side, we're talking all about the regulatory guardrails that need to be put on AI. That is so far above my pay grade, I just can't. But I have faith that people are really looking at this. FDA is really looking at their digital health approvals process. I'm in a federal AI leadership program that is amazing. It's a 6-month program. My cohort has 80 people from across the federal government, all different departments, everything from justice to the FCC to NIH. So we're a good group, and it's all these people who are forward-thinking senior executives who want to understand how AI can be applied in the government. So there's a lot of movement on that. And then, we also have a lot of really great movement on CMS, thinking about the unwinding of the public health emergency and the digital health changes that happened in that emergency. What is really useful, what is not functioning, and their regulatory writers are working fast and furious. So
that's absolutely incredible. It seems like there's so much movement, and I really love how it seems to be this really supportive culture that is really promoting innovation and creativity and kind of thinking outside the box. It's really, those types of solutions that I think just move everything forward. So that is really, really great to see.
Yeah, I mean, government is designed to move slowly, so don't expect miracles. However, we are there and we're on it, we're working on it, and we will move as quickly as our design will allow us to go.
We love that. We love the little asterisk to just put things in context with government. I love that. I would love to also learn a little bit more. I think you were really talking about so much amazing traction and movement that's happening. When you kind of look at the emerging tech landscape, I know AI is like a huge hot topic. Are there any other just broad categories that excite you that you see can be kind of interesting moving forward?
There's so many, but I think the application of genomics to health and the ease of data collection has been really, really interesting to me, because we have minority populations and populations that have traditionally been sidelined that have not been able to engage fully in some of these data points in the past. And so these data points can be collected pretty easily now. And I've even heard somebody talk about, looking at genetics and genome as the great equity for health, because they said your genome or your genes, they don't tell you what the color of your skin is, or where you live, or what zip code you're in, or how much access to healthcare you have. It's just really basic genetic data. And so in some ways, that could be a great equalizer for certain areas. I don't think that's 100% of the answer, but I think that some of those personalized medicine innovations that are coming can be incredibly beneficial to women, and could be incredibly beneficial to minority populations as well. There are many, many ways to remove bias, and we don't want to remove bias and act as though all the social determinants of health don't exist. But if we can remove our bias towards the environment in which people are interacting and focus in some cases on the actual mechanisms of a disease state, I think that we might see benefits exponentially in marginalized communities, actually. So I think you need to look at both sides, but that's an area that I'm really, really excited about as well.
That is amazing. I think what a great, plot when we think about what the future of health, and I think just in general, what that could look like. I do realize we are about 1 minute out, so would love if we could, my favorite question to ask as we kind of end our amazing discussion together is, if you have any words of wisdom that you want to kind of share with this group, anything maybe that, you were told by a mentor that was really powerful that you want to then, move along and pass forward.
Well, I have kind of a very fun, quick story about a mentor of mine in undergrad. And I had an assigned mentor and I had a chosen mentor. And my assigned mentor, I went in one day and I said, I figured out who I want to work with for graduate school, and here's where I want to go, and they're teaching at Yale. And my assigned mentor said to me, okay, so what if you don't get in? I'm like, then I'll apply again next year. And she said, well, what if you don't get in again? I'm like, I don't have any use for this conversation. And I left. And I went to my chosen mentor and I said, I know who I want to work with. And he's at Yale, and this is it. And he goes, okay, good. How are you going to get there? And I think the message is, if you're a mentor, and also if you want to accomplish something, seek out the people who challenge you to get where you want to go, and don't throw the roadblocks in your life.
That's amazing. Wow. What a beautiful way to end our discussion. I think that was so powerful. Thank you so much, April, for taking the time to chat with us today. What an enlightening discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, Nina.